hope you're doing well. My name is Anirvan Sen, and I'm a co-facilitator of the M&A Stories YouTube podcast, which is brought to you by Fifth Chrome Business Insights. Welcome to Season 3. The theme of this season is culture and its impact on M&A integration. Culture is one of the biggest challenges that face an M&A integration. And this challenge couldn't get any bigger, as more companies are pursuing M&A based on people and culture. That is why it is important to understand, internalize, respect, and develop a clear plan of action on how to handle culture in M&A. In this season, we will be interviewing industry leaders from across the globe to hear their stories on how they address culture in an M&A integration. So here we go with today's episode.
Hi there, welcome to another episode of M&A Stories. My name is Anirvan Sen and I am your host today. Our guest today is a founder and a CEO of a company that has developed a very novel way of approaching private equity and portfolio companies. Ladies and gentlemen, let me welcome Jay Goldman. Jay, how are you? I love your bookcase at the background. Is that real or is that an image?
That is a real bookcase.
Wow. So for our viewers and listeners, why didn't we start with an introduction?
I'm Jay Goldman, co-founder and CEO of Sensei Labs.
Excellent. Sensei Labs sounds, on one side, you've got the Sensei, which is kind of the lean thinking, and then it's labs. And how does it relate to sort of portfolio and private equity companies?
We started within a company called Klick Health about a decade or so ago on the heels of having written a book that went on to become a New York Times bestseller, The Decoded Company. And The Decoded Company is really all about how you take technology and data to build talent-centric and culture-centric organizations. And so we told the story of what we had done at Klick with our own internal platform, which was called Genome at the time. And we told the story of lots of other companies that had done similar things with technology and data to build talent-centric workplaces. And we got so much interest in the book, which was a wonderful, unexpected surprise. And it led to a global speaking tour where we got to speak all over the world. Google had us to a number of their offices. We spoke at Harvard, we spoke at NASA's headquarters, which was amazing. And everywhere we went, people wanted to know where they could buy this platform that we had built for ourselves, which at the time wasn't for sale. And so we decided to try and experiment and bring the platform to market. And we were looking for a name for what at the time would be a division of Klick, is now a completely separate company. And so we started to think about what we had talked about in Decoded. There are 3 decoded principles. The first is technology as a coach. So the idea that you can, and even more true now in our age of AI, 10 years later, it wasn't so much true at the time we were writing it, where we had that same full AI capability. But today, you can really have a coach in the form of technology that's watching your blind spots and coaching you towards better outcomes. The second principle is data as a sixth sense. How do we augment our decision-making with the right data to the right person at the right time? And the third is engineered ecosystems. The idea that we can be very intentional about the design of our ecosystems, of people, of culture, of team structure, of all of those sorts of things, even physical space. And so all of that sort of came together into this idea of a master teacher, sensei being a master teacher, the Japanese word. Also, the idea that in decoding a company, the first step is you need to augment the organization with sensors that can read data. And so those aren't necessarily physical sensors in your physical space, although you may have some of those, but looking at the organizational networks, at the way that work happens, at the digital tools and the digital footprint left behind by your team members. And so that's sort of part of the word, sensors. The other part is tools that have a high degree of emotional intelligence. So enterprise software particularly has a very bad reputation because most of it's terrible. And the part of what frustrates us so much with it is the user experience of it is not very good. And so we really wanted to lean into this idea of tools with a high degree of emotional intelligence, or EI. So combine sensors and emotional intelligence and you get Sensei. And so it really worked well as a word. A big part of our culture is a high degree of experimentation. So we wanted to bring the spirit of that into the name as well. And so this idea of labs being in a constant state of experimentation and of trying new things, both within our organization and encouraging others to do so on our software, lent itself really well to this combination of words as Sensei Labs.
Awesome. It sounds very futuristic. And I'm sure that a lot of companies haven't even woken up from their sleep to forget about, them getting prepared. What kind of led you down that path of setting up your company and using data? What were some of the trigger points?
So Klick itself is a commercialization partner for life science companies. They work with primarily biotech and pharma, although lots of medical device and other things as well, but primarily biotech and pharma on a global basis to help bring life-saving therapies to market. And Klick as an organization doesn't look very much like a traditional marketing agency, which is why we have always avoided that term and leaned into this idea of commercialization partner, but has always had a very strong technology background. We often talk culturally within Klick about our hacker roots, which really speaks to both sort of ethos of how you approach problem solving, but also to a strong technology background as a first principle to how you solve it. So very early in Klick's life, Klick was founded in 1997, so it's been around for quite a while now. It has been a rocket ship of growth for its entire life, 30 to 40% year-over-year growth, pretty much every year since it was founded. And so that growth and that culture have been enabled along the way through technology. Early on, one of the co-founders, Aaron Goldstein, was looking around and realized as they had moved into an office that now had 2 rooms rather than 1 room,
Sure.
there was a significant decrease in productivity and efficiency. The people in room A now needed to actually get up and walk into room B to talk to people. And that was just enough resistance that they started sending lots of email instead. And so he was watching every email thread get longer. Every meeting had more people in it than it used to have. And he thought, how do we get out of this trap? Because it's only going to get worse as the business keeps growing. Today, Klick's over 1,500 people globally. So I'm glad that he intercepted this early on because it would have got worse and worse over time. And so he had an inspiration to take at the time, an off-the-shelf customer success or CSR sort of platform, a ticket-based system. And he said, we're not going to use email for productivity anymore. So we'll obviously use it for communication externally with our customers and our clients. But within the organization, we're going to use this ticket-based system. So if I need you to work on something, instead of sending you an email, I'm going to send you a ticket or a task.
Sure.
And that's how we're going to track all this work that gets done. So they started experimenting with that. It was very successful. Efficiency went back up. People were actually really enjoying using it. It was so much easier than dealing with an overflowing inbox full of hundreds of emails, and you avoided all the problems of things like getting CC'd into the middle of an email thread and not knowing whether you have to pay attention to it or whether somebody is just covering up for,
Sure.
You don't have the attachment everyone's talking to, all of those sorts of problems. So they started to build on that initial idea and that initial system. And as they added more things to it, they realized that there's actually a lot of really interesting data in this about what's happening. In fact, in some ways, the data is more interesting than the work that's going through the system for any individual piece of work.
Right.
Because if you step back and look at the patterns of data, I can see who assigns work to other people, or I can watch for patterns. So a very early pattern detection that they built into the system was what we've come to call task tennis, which is this idea that you and I might be working on something together,
Right.
and we're bouncing this thing back and forth between us.
Sure.
And sometimes that's totally fine. We're just collaborating, but often it actually indicates a problem.
Yeah.
And it might be that the requirements were unclear, might be that I'm being a jerk and I just don't want to do the work, could be all kinds of different reasons. But flagging that to a project manager to have them look at and pay attention was a very early way of saying there is something going on here that as a pattern tends to lead to a bad place.
Right.
That was really the insight that led to everything that we do today in the platform, because that insight said we can augment our intelligence as humans by leaning into the things that computers do very well, pattern matching at large data sets being one of those things. And so that's just led all the way through to what we do today at Sensei Labs.
Awesome. That's a remarkable story. And you said it was formed in 1997, the
Yes.
original company. Yeah. Okay, cool. So What are some of the implementations that you do these days? Because it's been a couple of decades since you guys started out. Things have changed, times have changed, and there's a lot more focus on culture and people. So, what are some of the recent implementations? What sort of implementations are there?
So Sensei Labs has one product today called Conductor. Conductor is what we call an orchestration platform. It helps organizations, typically mid and large scale organizations, to orchestrate their most critical programs.
Mhm.
We do three types of orchestration with Conductor. The first is what we call enterprise orchestration. We work directly with those enterprises on those large scale programs. Those programs often look like things like transformations, both strategic and digital. They look a lot often like M&A transactions, which I know we'll talk about more today on this recording. They look like procurement and cost reduction or cost takeout on products. So those sort of large critical programs, they often have tens or hundreds of people involved. They will have a lifespan on that program in years, often in the 5 to 10 year range. And they are often tracking tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars in benefit, sometimes even billions of dollars in benefit, depending on the program. Some of the mega mergers that we've been involved with, for example, the T-Mobile Sprint merger was orchestrated on Conductor. That is well into the billions of dollars as a mega merger. So that's enterprise orchestration. We work directly with those enterprises. The second type is what we call client orchestration. We work with professional service firms who deliver their services to their clients using Conductor as the orchestration platform.
Sure.
Our largest partnership is with Kearney, or AT Kearney as they used to be called. Kearney uses us as their orchestration platform globally with their client base, and they've built out their IP and their approach to things like M&A transactions or transformations or whatever else into Conductor as what we call a fast start. It's a template within the Conductor environment. And so they can use that in a sales scenario. They win more business when they pitch with Conductor. They then deploy Conductor very quickly with that fast start, and then they can deliver their services on that. And then the third is what we call portfolio orchestration. This is working with the private equity owners of those enterprises. And so we help them on orchestrating their overall portfolio from the deal flow right at the stage of even as early as due diligence through their deal close, the handoff from the deal team to a value creation team. If there is one, sometimes that's the same team. And then all the way through that value creation within the portfolio company and across all those value creations at the fund level. So same platform across all three types of orchestration, always Conductor at the root of that, but that's the three sort of general implementation types that we have today as a company.
Fascinating. Now let's unpack your platform, right? I mean, I'm trying to visualize this. Is this like a project management platform? Is this like a collaboration platform? What is it? And maybe we can take a scenario, a mergers and acquisition scenario. Sure. And maybe stage by stage, we kind of walk through how people use your platform.
So Conductor is a combination of those things. It is a full project portfolio management platform. So all of the timelines, the risk and issue tracking, the governance approaches, project stages and stage gate approvals, workflows through a no-code workflow engine, all of those components are part of Conductor. It also combines enterprise-grade KPI tracking as part of that. So you can define your data model. They can be financial or non-financial KPIs. We do a lot of financials for obvious reasons. We are seeing a significant increase in non-financial KPIs, like, for example, ESG metrics, as part of tracking the overall success of a program. You can use that KPI tool to implement a management methodology like OKRs, which is very common. And so you can build your full OKR tracking alongside your program execution and your financial tracking. We also are a full collaboration platform. So we complement something like a Microsoft Teams. We have actually a full Microsoft 365 integration. So we have a Teams add-on, an Outlook add-on. We can embed Power BI. We natively produce PowerPoint decks. We have Excel as our data interchange format. So lots of support for the Microsoft 365 suite. The collaboration in Conductor can get right down to that level of agile tasks in Kanban boards, and your teams, typically non-technical teams, the technical teams are often using a tool like Jira, and we have an integration with Jira. But for all those non-technical teams, and especially in an M&A context or a strategic transformation, you have lots of work that needs to happen across work streams with teams that start off very siloed and have to come together. And so that collaboration is built, and all the access permissions and everything else are built right into the platform to be able to accomplish that kind of interaction between those people. And then we have an executional intelligence component to this, an intelligence layer that's looking for coaching opportunities to help drive executional intelligence across those teams, building on that very early insight about task tennis way back in the day, now evolved into a full intelligence layer that can help look for coaching opportunities and guide people back towards executional intelligence.
Right. One of the things that I've noticed, especially with the new age digital platforms, collaboration, and project management, program portfolio management, is that it can be heavy when it comes to input from people, when it comes to input from companies. Multiple people are involved. How does one ensure that the platform stays true to its cause or true to its reason of existence?
Yeah, it's a great question. It sort of leans into the change management component of this, which I think is the critical piece of transformations. And we use the term transformation to refer to all of these programs because they are all in their own way transformative. If we're acquiring a new company, that transaction, and critically the post-merger integration of that transaction, will be transformative. Otherwise, there wasn't any reason for us to do it.
Sure.
If we're a serial acquirer and we're acquiring smaller assets, it's perhaps less transformative at the individual level, but the overall success of that as a program is obviously critical to the business. And so when we talk about transformation in this context, it's really any of these programs. It doesn't have to be a sort of capital T transformation led by a transformation management office, although we do lots of those as well. But when we think about these programs as transformations, one of the things that gets left out of that project plan probably the most frequently is change management.
Right.
How are we going to make sure that as a program, we have to affect change in the organization? Otherwise, there was no reason to run this program.
Sure.
So if we don't come out the other end looking different than where we are today, we've actually failed.
Yeah.
So how do we ensure that we're going to be successful at doing that? And the answer is partly tooling, and it's a lot to do with just managing that as an explicit process that you want to watch out for. So we've developed over the years an enterprise orchestration maturity model.
Mm-hmm.
The model looks at the, excuse me, the model looks at the readiness within an organization for being able to orchestrate the work that needs to be done in a transformative sense. We have 3 categories in that model: people, process, and platforms. Across those 3 categories, we have 10 questions. And the 10 questions get into things like who is in the role of managing the work that needs to be done. Typically would be called a project manager, but doesn't necessarily have that title. Often we're seeing different titles in organizations these days. You get into things like change management. Are we explicitly measuring the impact of the change that's going to occur? And are we proactively managing that through stakeholder assessments, through change plans, through other pieces like that? So we do this as a service that we offer for no cost. And for anybody who's listening and is interested, you can visit our website at senseilabs.com and request an assessment there. We also do this with our customers on a quarterly basis. Our customer success team will go through that maturity model assessment with them. It takes about a half hour to go through. We will look at their score compared to the initial baseline and their progress over time. We'll identify some of the areas we want to improve their maturity on over the coming quarter, and we'll put in place a plan that obviously we orchestrate in Conductor, but we'll put in place a plan that we're going to work through with them over that quarter to raise their score on maybe 1 or 2 of those measures. And then we'll run the assessment again at the next quarterly opportunity, and that will give us, an updated score for that. So all of that to say, change management is a critical part of the success of these programs. When you think about how organizations run a program like this, let's use post-merger integration as an example.
Right.
So you had a deal thesis for why this made sense as an acquisition. That deal thesis would articulate certain KPIs. Obviously, a number of those are going to be financial. They may not be exclusively financial. If this is a acqui-hire in a smaller organization, this could be a talent impact. If there's an IP reason behind this, then there's a value of that IP to the organization. If this is accretive from a revenue perspective, then you have certain targets there. If there are efficiencies to be gained through this acquisition, you have certain cost reduction or FTE reduction targets. There may be ESG impacts, whatever that set of things are that make up that purpose. You now, over the course of this integration, need to make sure that you're paying out that thesis. And there is a critical handoff point here, often, between the deal team who close a deal and the team who now have to run this. So if we're talking large integrations here, you've got a corp dev team who closed a deal. You've got an integration management office who are now responsible for this. At a smaller scale, those may be the same people, or you may not have an integration management office. This may just get handed off to a line of business owner to be able to run. But that handoff point is critical because the corp dev team set up the deal thesis and why we should do this, but they're often not responsible for the end result of whether this was a successful acquisition. Right. So you had asked me earlier about deals that deals that go well and deals that don't go well. And I would flag this as one of the things that often results in the deal not going well. If you've given incentive to a team whose job is to close deals, but not be compensated on how the deal actually plays out, and then you've got a separate group of people who weren't part of closing the deal, but are now responsible for how it plays out, you have adverse incentives between those two teams. Right. And that is a high risk here. You're going to do deals that don't actually make sense, but are easy to close. That's the potential downside there. And then you're going to have teams that can't make that deal thesis actually work because it wasn't a real thesis to start off with. And that's where they're going to get stuck on the impact side. But to come back to your question about how do you keep the platform accurate, this was a long-winded answer to that. Think about how that gets managed today. So when we go into an organization today, I would say probably 7 or 8 times out of 10, right now that is managed in spreadsheets and PowerPoint and Teams, maybe, and a whole bunch of email. So when we think about the hidden cost of doing that, what I would label as a traditional method of doing this. We think that's status quo and it's how we've always done things. So it's easy to mask the actual cost that has to the business. We've found very consistently across programs that we come into, especially the ones that are using those traditional methods, there is a very high internal cost of that, as high often as 25% of the work effort, which is lost to status reporting. So you think about that at the scale of a large program where you have 100 people working on it. 25 people out of that team spend their time on status reporting. 25% of your headcount cost is paying for status reporting. If you can automate this and get that number down, and we've seen it get down to about 5% in the best cases, you can't get rid of it. There always needs to be some amount of status. Consider the impact to your M&A, to your transformation, to whatever your program is, of reallocating 20% of the work effort back to high value work from lower value status reporting and manual effort that goes into doing that. That is a significant ROI on moving away from those traditional methods that's masked by it being the status quo in the way that we've always approached it. Also, the data in that traditional approach is already out of date anyway. So think about the effort of preparing something like a monthly SteerCo report for a steering committee meeting. You are going to impact many people in the organization who have to work to produce that report. The effort that goes into it is taking away from everything else. But also, by the time the report is actually produced, all the data is obsolete because it's taken so much time to get to a finalized PowerPoint deck that everyone who had to sign off has signed off on, and you've pulled data out of different systems and you've massaged it together. Lots of opportunity for error in there, copying data from different systems, easy to make transcription errors, easy to make calculation errors buried in Excel spreadsheets and pivot tables, easy to make interpretation errors of that data. compounded by the fact that this passes through so many hands to get to the end result.
Sure.
So when we look at that monthly Steerco meeting PowerPoint deck today, we should assume it's riddled with errors, but we don't. We take it as this is the actual source of truth. The problem is it will get into that meeting, and now we will spend a bunch of time arguing about the data that's in the presentation because it's not accurate. And so someone in the room is going to say, wait, that's not the right number. That's out of date. You didn't take this into account. And now we're just going to spend a bunch of time arguing about the status update that we thought was accurate the whole time. The sad part about all of this is it's an easily solved problem. It's not like we had to develop some incredible generative AI system to solve this. You just need to put it all in one place and treat that as the single source of truth. And you need to remind people that they have to do updates. So the way we keep it accurate in Conductor is we think about this as sort of the risk reward at an individual level. Why does somebody not update the data that they're responsible for?
Sure.
To me, when I think about it as an individual, if I'm working on a large program, let's use our PMI example. Let's say I'm working on a project that's part of this post-merger integration, and I should be providing updates to my workstream lead about this, but it's kind of painful. I have to go pull data from a bunch of places, and then I have to put it into this single PowerPoint slide that I'm allowed to put it into, which is very typical of what we see in a status report. And I don't really have enough space in there. So I actually have to critically think about the status of my project to fit it all into there. The famous and probably misattributed Mark Twain quote, because I think every Mark Twain quote is probably misattributed, but he famously apparently said, if I had more time, I would have written a shorter letter.
Right.
That's the problem you have here as well, which is we're constraining people to a single slide because we don't want them to write a giant monologue about things. Right. But that actually forces, and we want it to force critical thinking, but that takes time.
Sure.
So the risk reward to me is spend a whole lot of time and effort to do this at very low reward.
Yeah.
Until I get yelled at. Then obviously that's the carrot and stick, and now I've got the stick. If we can shift that and say, okay, you need to come in and do a weekly review. Your weekly review in Conductor is heavily curated by Conductor for you. So we only ask you to look at projects that need a review this week, and we only ask you to look at the component of the project that needs to be reviewed. So for most of the team members, even on a large PMI, that weekly review might be 10 to 15 minutes of their time. They know that going in. They'll get a reminder that they have to come. They click on the button in the reminder. It's delivered in Teams or it's delivered by email. They come into Conductor. They complete their weekly review and they're done. That's it. No other data needs to be put in. No spreadsheets need to be built. They don't have to go pull data from other places. We surface the data to them and say, does this look correct? Do you have any comments to add? Great. Move on. Look at the risks, issues, interdependencies. If you're using those in Conductor, you can turn them off. But if you're using them, let's do a quick review. Does this look right? Anything to add? Great. Let's look at your KPIs. Here's the current data. Do you need to make any updates to this? If you do, you can do it right there, or you can pull it out to Excel, make bulk updates and put it back in. Done. Move on to the next project. So 10 to 15 minutes once a week is a very reasonable ask of people because they know that they don't have to go and do anything else. So the risk reward is now skewed heavily into the favor of, I should just spend this 10 to 15 minutes and do this. And as a result, you get updated data in the platform. Now, sometimes we still need to monitor that and say, some people are still not going to do that, even though it's very easy for them to do. So we have tracking ability here that we don't have when we're just asking people to submit it or fill in a sheet or whatever else. And we can surface the leaderboard of who has done their updates and who hasn't. We think of this from a change management perspective as a healthy amount of public shaming.
Right.
So if you know that at the start of this meeting, there's going to be a leaderboard up on screen for everyone to see, and that leaderboard shows who's green and who's red on having done their status updates. You don't want to be the person who's red. Maybe once is fine. You certainly don't want to be the person who's red week after week, especially not if the leaderboard tracks the number of weeks that you're late on having done this. And that kind of healthy amount of public shaming can be quite useful in ensuring that people adhere to this. Then we can build some intelligence in here that's hard to build in when you have disparate systems. So we have, in our own instance of this, an algorithm that's part of people doing this review, and we can turn it on for our customers when they want to. And the algorithm looks for too many greens in a row on a project review. No project goes that well. There's
Right.
always something that happens. And
Yeah.
so it will step in and say, hey, I noticed that this is your 10th green project review in a row. Are you sure that this project is going this well? Because it's often not actually going that well. And so that's
Never.
part of guiding people towards truth in what they put into the platform. All of that ladders up to, if we can get people to spend 10 to 15 minutes once a week, we get real-time data updated in the platform. We get the benefit of early warning detection on things that might be going sideways when they're small problems. In Decoded, we talk about a principle called the rule of 5 degrees. It's very simple. Think about getting on a boat on one side of a lake, traveling to a destination on the other side of the lake. When you set out from your side, if you're 5 degrees off course, it's a very small course correction.
Yeah.
But the longer you go without making that course correction, the more impactful it will be on the other side of the lake, which means if it's a big lake, you could be miles or kilometers off of your destination when you reach that other side.
Right.
Our goal in the platform is to point out that you're 5 degrees off course as early as possible, so you can make those tiny course corrections that are very easy to make and stay on track to hit your destination. So that's the power we can deliver with regular content updates.
Gotcha. That's clever. What are some of the telltale signs that when you walk in and let's say the leadership has bought the idea that your tool can be really beneficial, but when the rubber meets the road, when it comes to actual implementation, you have those detractors, you have those people dragging their heels, right? What are some of the telltale signs that this is going to be a tough one versus this is going to be a walk in the park?
Yeah, that's a great question. Part of it's cultural. You can often tell just in the early conversations with a leadership team whether this is going to be successful or not. I remember, I will absolutely not name the company, but I remember a few years ago, pre-COVID certainly, being asked to come and meet with an executive leadership team who were considering our platform. And so I flew down to, I'm not going to say where, I flew down to a large American city where their office was located, and they had a car waiting for me. So I got in the car and we drove out to their office, which was out in the suburbs. And they had one of those massive campuses. So we turned in off the highway and it's this long winding driveway. And we passed by, I'm not making any of this up. This is real. We passed by a fountain in a pond that was shooting water in the air. And then we got to this grand entrance to their building. And then I was escorted into the building and I was taken up to the top floor because I was meeting with the executives. Executives are always on the top floor. So I was shown up to there, and then I was shown into the executive wing, which was actually labeled with a sign that said executive wing with an arrow. And I knew I had entered the executive wing because the carpet got significantly plusher when I turned the corner into the executive wing. So I was shown into this boardroom that it was like if you had asked a Hollywood set designer to make a big corporate boardroom, this is the room they would have made. Wood paneled walls, giant boardroom table, probably could have seated 40 people at this table, big leather wingback, executive chairs, every, place setting immaculate, right? I'm the only person in the room. So bit of a weird room to be waiting in. And I didn't really know where to sit at the table because I didn't know how many people were coming in. So I just kind of stood at the window looking over this pond with the water shooting in the air. And so then 3 people came into the room to meet with me. So we all sat at the end of this table awkwardly because it could have had 37 more people sitting at it, right?
Sure.
So they said to me, okay, we asked you to come here because, and I won't stereotype, but you can picture in your head probably what these people looked like, given everything else, right? Okay. So they said to me, we asked you to come in here because we are struggling with the millennials.
Right.
And I said, okay. And they said, we just don't understand them and we don't know how to work with them. We'd like to put your platform in place to help.
Wow.
And I said, I don't think our platform's going to help.
Right.
I think that your problem is much deeper than a question of which software platform you've put in place.
Sure.
Because the truth is, every aspect of my visit to this office has told me that the new generation of people coming into the workplace don't understand you.
Yeah.
They don't understand this culture. And not only do they not understand it, but they have no interest in taking part in it.
Right.
Everything about this experience, from the car waiting at the airport to the pond with the fountain, to the lush carpeting in the executive wing, to this frankly ridiculous boardroom, none of it is in line with where culture is in the workplace today and where it needs to be. And I can't imagine what happened to that company over COVID, because everybody going to work from home would have been an absolutely forbidden thing in their culture. I can guarantee that they had an expectation you were in the office every working hour of the day.
Right.
And, that to me is that's a very extreme example, but it's a very clear telltale that this is not going to be the kind of environment that's going to adopt a platform like this. I will say, though, that over the course of the pandemic, we compressed probably, I don't know the actual number, a decade's worth of technology adoption and change into probably a year-long period at the beginning of the pandemic.
That's right.
And I think that's been hugely helpful for the world. I think it's unlocked the ability for folks like you and I to have this conversation right now without even pausing to consider that we're in completely different parts of the world, other than maybe time zones to make sure we could book the meeting. Yeah. But aside from that, I spend my day bouncing geographically around the world in the meetings that I'm having without leaving my home office, which is amazing. Right. And in the past, I would have been on airplanes to do that same thing. That I think is phenomenal. I think the move to hybrid workplaces has embraced the idea that you can work separate from where you live, and that geographically that's much less important than what it used to be. And if you want to work for us, we are a Toronto-based company, but you want to live in the wilderness, as long as you have a good internet connection, we don't really care where you live. I think all of that is amazing. It has accelerated the idea that platforms like Conductor are critical to the success of transformative programs, that in a way that I don't think was present prior to the pandemic. And I think the move to a hybrid environment and a hybrid workplace has only made that truer, because the need for high degrees of accountability about what you're working on and when it's due and those sorts of things have increased significantly when you don't have everybody in a room together working on the same thing. But sometimes you still encounter cultures where it's pretty clear from an early conversation, this is not going to work in your environment. And we tend to walk away from those. We'd rather not sell something to somebody that's just not going to be successful.
Right. And how about the other end of the spectrum, where you walked in and you're like, yep, these are the guys. It will be good to work with these guys. They seem to be aligned to the thinking. So maybe a story from there.
Yeah, what's an interesting one on the transformation side, it's maybe a little bit less obvious on, say, a post-merger integration, but an organization that is aware that transformation is not business as usual.
Yeah.
And has explicitly defined that differently. So a very clear tell is the creation of a transformation management office that's distinct from their enterprise program management office or just their PMO.
Yeah.
That's actually quite clearly an acknowledgement that the way we've always managed programs in the past isn't the way that we need to manage this type of program to be successful. And so when you hand a transformation to a typical PMO, because it's their training and it's their approach to things, they tend to approach it the same way. So they say, okay, this is a 2-year-long transformation. These are the phases of the transformation. If it's a waterfall type PMO, they will approach it that way. Maybe there's some elements of agile in there, but transformations don't work the same way as a typical enterprise program.
Right.
They need to be dynamic in nature. We don't always know what the outcomes are going to be or how long it's going to take. They are much more iterative in nature to be successful. And so if you don't take that on as a different type of program, then you are probably going to fail at that transformation. And so one of the early indicators for us that this will be a good environment from a transformation perspective is we're talking to the transformation team and we're not talking to the traditional PMO team, or maybe they're at the table because they're going to help run this. And that's great because you do need to keep people accountable. But you've created a transformation mandate that is separate from business as usual is a very good early indicator that this is the right kind of environment for Conductor on a transformation-like program.
That's a great call out. That's a great call out. And especially the transformation management office, I think makes a whole lot of difference. And it's not unusual to see companies kind of tend to resort to using their existing project management offices, saying, hey, we've already got those. We don't need to create a new one. But it's a good call out. I was just
Think of
looking.
this as there's a quote, and again, probably misattributed. I think all famous quotes are probably misattributed. Anyway, this
Right.
one's apparently something that Einstein said, which is effectively you can't solve today's problems with the same thinking that created them.
Yes.
And so that think about a transformation. Why are we doing a transformation? It is an acknowledgement of being in a fail state.
Right.
We wouldn't need to do a transformation if we had done that work up front, right? If we were the market leader and we continue to be the market leader through innovation and through all kinds of other things, then we wouldn't create a transformation office and we wouldn't need to do a transformation. So implicit in the fact that you've designated that we need to do a transformation is also an acknowledgement that we are in a fail state and we need to address that fail state. That means that you have to approach this differently than what created the environment for the failure in the first place.
That's right. And in fact, many of the business leaders are kind of still, especially the middle management, I wouldn't say the C-level necessarily all the time, but a lot of the middle management people are still kind of stuck in the thinking that we spend 20 years, last 20 years, last 15 years like this, we're going to spend the next 15 years like this as well. So that's
human nature, right?
Yeah.
You know, we sort of assume that the way that the world is today is the way it's always been and the way that it always will be. If you look at, especially on a sort of history of the world kind of timeline, if you look at how long the world has been like it is today, it's like a tiny fraction of a second of the 24-hour day of human history.
Right.
But if you think about it, even just from how long has the workplace looked like the workplace,
Sure.
What we take today as a 5-day work week from 9 to 5 is really an invention of the Ford Motor Company in setting up their factories.
Right.
And so we're really talking in the last century that we have been in that sort of mode of that's what a work week looks like. But it's a kind of a fundamental part of what we all assume is the way things are supposed to be and the way they will be. So even on something like that, we took a fairly, a fairly radical step. We don't see it as that radical, but we adopted a 4-day week as part of the Sensei Labs approach because there's no reason it has to be a 5-day week other than that Henry Ford decided Monday to Friday was going to be the working days and Saturday and Sunday were going to be the weekend. But there's no other reason it has to be that way. Sure. And so you have an opportunity as an organization to reconsider anything that doesn't break a fundamental law of physics. I encourage you to reconsider it. We can't get around the laws of physics. So, okay, fine. That's a limitation. Gravity is gravity. But everything else is only there because we created it as humans and we've adopted it as the status quo. And then we continue to persist it as the status quo. And so when you go back to first principles and you consider if we could achieve the same amount of productivity in 4 days that we can achieve in 5, which is a 20% increase in productivity across that time, which when you really think about it, how much of your day is spent wasted in meetings that you didn't need to be in, or on long email threads you didn't need to be part of, or doing status update PowerPoint decks that could have been automated, or all of the things we've already talked about. It's actually relatively easy to achieve a 20% increase. You can't fall into the trap of thinking, well, then why can't we go down to 3 days? Because you can't keep multiplying the effect, right? But to get from 5 days to 4 days, we went through about a 2-month period to make that transition, which was very intentionally thinking about our processes, evaluating meetings on the calendar. Do we have to have this meeting? Does this need to be recurring? Can we move to asynchronous work on this rather than synchronous? And through that period, we pressure tested a whole bunch of processes in our organization around where does this break if we do 4 days or if we have to increase productivity here. And it made us a far more efficient organization. And the reward for our team is significant because aside from just having an extra day off every week, which is a lot, I mean, that is a big increase to the team. And I'll be clear, 4 days at the same pay. So this isn't a change in pay structure or anything. Sure. It's not 10 hours a day. It's 8 hours a day, 4 days a week. That's the expectation. But it also freed people up. So in those other days of the week where they might have done personal things, they had an appointment they had to go to, they needed to run an errand, they now centralize those into their Friday, which gives them more focused time during the week on work and a less rushed weekend, trying to get through all those personal things that they otherwise were trying to do in their weekend, which actually gives them back their weekend to spend recharging, spend with family and friends and those sorts of things. So across the board, our team feels better rested, more recharged, more creative, more able to spend focused time on their work. And that's what you can get by kind of reconsidering some of those things we otherwise just take as being fundamental truths.
Brilliant. I was just looking at the clock. When you're having good conversation, the time just flies. What are some of your favorite business books?
So I read it a lot, but I also try to alternate between fiction and nonfiction.
Sure.
So the bookshelf behind me, as you mentioned, full of books, probably about half and half fiction and nonfiction. And I find that as people get older, they tend to move away from fiction and towards nonfiction. Right. And I think that's a mistake. I think if I can make a suggestion to your viewers and listeners, you learn more about the human condition and how to interact with other people through fiction than you do through nonfiction. So there are lots of great business books out there, but there are also lots of really amazing fiction books. And I would highly encourage you to think about some of those if you're, looking for a book to read. On the business book side, the book I always recommend when people ask me this question, which used to be actually quite hard to find, and has become easier because there's actually a reprint now of the book, was written by Andy Grove, who was the co-founder of Intel. The book's called High Output Management. It was written in a time before all of the digital technologies we take for granted in the workplace today, which is somewhat ironic given that it was written by the co-founder of Intel. So computers existed, but not a lot of the tools. The internet wasn't around. But if you read it as a first principles book, it is one of the most succinct views of how to get high output and engagement from teams that I've read, and absolutely evergreen in applying those, maybe not directly the way that are listed in the book because technology has changed, but you can take those principles and you can apply them in your organization, and you will learn more in that book than I think I probably learned in most of the books that I've read since then. If you want a book that I thought was quite good about this idea of breaking the rules and going back to first principles, the No Rules book from the Netflix leadership team is also a great one, because it really encourages that idea of why do we have to follow these rules that are somewhat arbitrary, or actually not somewhat arbitrary, or completely arbitrary in the first place. I would say you don't try to just apply wholesale anything you read in a book to your organization. Every environment is different. You're reading the high-level summary of what took years worth of thinking on their behalf and trial and error and experimentation. So take those as inputs, whether it's Andy or whether it's the Netflix team, and think about how to apply them and experiment with them in your environment. Don't take them just as a direct, literal shift and apply in your org, because they will fail.
Sure. No, this is good. I'm sure some of the viewers and listeners may want to connect with you. What's the best way to connect and have further conversation?
You can find me on pretty much every social network as Jay Goldman, Jaygoldman. So Twitter or LinkedIn, by all means, reach out and happy to engage in a conversation. You can find Sensei Labs, SENSEILABS, on all of those same places. We post quite a lot on LinkedIn. Visit our website for more information about Conductor and what we do. We host a regular webinar series as well. So if you'd like to learn more about enterprise client or portfolio orchestration, you can visit our website or our LinkedIn page to see when the next webinar is. Excellent.
I'll include those details in our description in our show notes. Jay, it was such a pleasure speaking with you, and the time just flew.
It was great. Thank you.
Yeah. So thank you.
My pleasure.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was Jay Goldman, founder and CEO of Sensei Labs. Thanks for joining us. Till next time, promise a winning culture.
Did you like today's content? If yes, then don't forget to hit the like button. If you heard something interesting, then don't forget to share it with your network and friends. And last but not least, please support us on this journey to spread awareness on topics related to M&A and integration by subscribing to our channel. That's all for now. Stay healthy and see you next time.
And if you like this session, I'm sure you'll also like our latest new tool. It is a quick assessment scorecard to assess the robustness of your culture integration capabilities in M&A. It just takes less than 5 minutes to answer. It is for free and you get instantaneous assessment. So visit culturema.scoreapp.com. That's culturema.scoreapp.com and find out for yourself. I hope you guys enjoyed the show today. This show was sponsored by Fifth Chrome, a business strategy advisor in a training company specializing in M&A, post-merger integration, and business strategy.